Hello and welcome. I'm LJ, and in this video I shall be answering 1 Samuel 13:1, and which is the correct translation. I shall be comparing three Bibles, the KJV, the NIV and the ESV. Neither of these agree with one another in this verse, but which is the correct translation? 1 Samuel 13:1. Saul reigned 1 year, and when he had reigned 2 years over Israel, KJV. 1 Samuel 13:1. Saul was 30 years old when he became king, and he reigned over Israel 42 years. NIV. 1 Samuel 13:1. Saul lived for 1 year and then became king, and when he had reigned for 2 years over Israel. ESV. Some people say that it does not matter which Bible version you use, as they are all in essence the same. This verse is a clear example that simply is not true. It is impossible for Saul to have been 30 years old, as the NIV would state, when he came to reign, but only be a year old, as the ESV would state. That is a direct contradiction, and so they cannot be saying the same thing. When we have a look into the verse, we find that that isn't the only problem that these two versions have. The KJV is correct. There are two parts to this one verse, and the NIV and the ESV have them both wrong. Let's start with the first part. The KJV says Saul reigned 1 year. The Hebrew words translated are ben shana. That's son, year in direct English translation. So it comes down to the translation of the word ben. Ben certainly does mean son, but it also can mean first, as in Leviticus 12:6. And when the days of her purifying are fulfilled for a son or for a daughter, she shall bring a lamb for the first year for a burnt offering, and a young pigeon or a turtle dove for a sin offering, unto the door of the tabernacle of the congregation, unto the priest. The Hebrew word ben is translated twice in this verse, once as son, and the second time as first. Both the NIV and the ESV agree with this translation in the KJV. Leviticus 12:6. When the days of her purification for a son or daughter are over, she is to bring to the priest at the entrance to the tent of meeting a year-old lamb for a burnt offering, and a young pigeon or a dove for a sin offering. NIV. Leviticus 12:6. And when the days of her purifying are completed, whether for a son or for a daughter, she shall bring to the priest at the entrance of the tent of meeting a lamb a year old for a burnt offering, and a pigeon or a turtle dove for a sin offering. ESV. The NIV and the ESV also agree ben can be translated first or one in Exodus 12:5. and in Leviticus 23:12, to name just a few. The NIV and the ESV have no problem with ben being translated as meaning one or first in numerical value. Nowhere in the text do we have the number 30 as the NIV has translated. There simply is nothing on which to base that translation. The ESV does correctly translate 1 year, but then states that Saul lived 1 year. The problem with that translation is the Hebrew word used is be-malikuv, that's Strong's 4427, which literally means a primitive root, to reign, to ascend the throne, to be king, or made queen. The NIV, though, gets the reign part correct, as it says Saul began to reign. So in this first part of the verse, the NIV and the ESV contradict each other and the Hebrew text. Both seem very confused. Let's look at the second part of the verse. The NIV and the ESV both say that Saul reigned 42 years. The KJV says that when he reigned 2 years. Interestingly, the word malak is used, which is from the same root word 4427 as we had in the first part, which the KJV and the NIV translated as reigned or became king, while the ESV translated it as lived. Here the ESV does render it as reigned, as does the NIV and the KJV. But what does it mean when he reigned 2 years? Let's look at the next verse for context. 1 Samuel 13:2. Saul chose him 3,000 men of Israel, whereof 2,000 were with Saul in Michmash and in Mount Bethel, and 1,000 were in Jonathan, in Gibeath of Benjamin, and the rest of the people he sent every man to his tent. So, after he had reigned 2 years, did this event happen. Saul chose 3,000 men of Israel after he reigned for 2 years. The NIV does not link verse 1 to verse 2 by simply saying Saul lived 42 years. This ends verse 1, and verse 2 is a separate event. The ESV does link verse 1 to verse 2. And when he had reigned for 2 years over Israel, which leads into verse 2, choosing the 3,000 men. So the ESV states that this event happened after Saul had reigned for 42 years. Clearly, there is a problem. We cannot have 2 years and 42 years being correct. The Hebrew translated as 2 years by the KJV is ushate shanim, and that's plural of shana. This is 2 years. The NIV and the ESV translation as 42 years not only goes against the Hebrew text, but also contradicts the Bible itself. Acts 13:21. And afterward they desired a king, and gave unto them Saul the son of Cis, a man of the tribe of Benjamin, by the space of 40 years. So the Bible tells us that Saul reigned 40 years. It is not possible that Saul could have reigned for 42 years, or that he could have chosen the 3,000 men after reigning for 42 years as king if he only reigned for 40 years. But that was the KJV saying he reigned 40 years. What about the NIV and the ESV? Acts 13:21. Then the people asked for a king, and he gave them Saul, the son of Kish, of the tribe of Benjamin, who ruled 40 years. NIV. Acts 13:21. Then they asked for a king, and God gave them Saul, the son of Kish, a man of the tribe of Benjamin, for 40 years. ESV. So the ESV and the NIV both agree that Saul reigned for 40 years. The KJV again is correct, and the NIV and the ESV not only contradict the Hebrew text, but they contradict themselves. Thank you very much for listening. I hope this has been useful, and I look forward to seeing you on another video. God bless.